Welcome to this week's Inside the Lords. I've partly been involved in the ongoing debates in relation to the Victims and Prisoners Bill. I just wanted to comment on the way things happen. I had amendments last week, you saw them. This week I was just kind of keeping my eye on what was going on, and suddenly I was sitting there and I realised that there was an attempt at saying that anybody who, for example, claimed parental alienation was problematic, and it was all muddled up in a whole range of protecting children from parents if they were guilty of domestic abuse or sexual violence. So it was quite difficult to untangle. So just to say what parental alienation is where you basically get your kid and tell them that their mum or dad, usually dad, is evil, stop them hearing from them. And this is obviously usually in the course of a marital dispute, who's going to have access to the kids. And it's really a kind of abuse itself in a way. And I could see that what was happening was that there was a real attempt at institutionalising via an amendment, or via a series of amendments, a way of saying that effectively dads who wanted access to their kids after splitting up can be real problems, and they talked about it in a particularly derogatory way. But anyway, I didn't make a very good speech. You can see it below. That's encouraging for you. It was more that I wanted to explain to you that in committee stage, you sometimes don't even realise that certain amendments might be saying something that's problematic, and I raised some issues. And I thought that what was really nice was there was a certain generosity of the fact that I was burbling on, as I am now. People understood that I was just tentatively trying to see what they were trying to do. And then, this is typical of the Lords, the person who spoke after me was actually a judge from family courts who explained in brilliant detail that very often in family courts there are attempts at using something like an accusation of domestic abuse as a way of indeed stopping people having access to the kids. And he made the point the wording of the amendment was so bad that it would mean that you could use it to say, oh, well, my husband was guilty of a domestic issue years ago, and now, even though it's got nothing to do with it, I'm not going to let them see the kids. Anyway, that was the kind of thing. So I just thought, it's an interesting thing for you to know the way it happens. I have just, however, come from a much more substantive bill, which is a private member's bill being put forward by the Lib Dems, Baroness Burt, in relation to conversion therapy. Now, if ever there was a situation where words don't quite do justice to what is being described, the bill that has been put forward by Baroness Burt is incredibly slight, vague, could be interpreted in a range of ways. It was interesting that the people who supported the ban on conversion therapy, this notion that everywhere you look there are people being beaten up because of their sexual orientation or because of their gender identity, or people were telling terrible tales of cruelty and coercion, which obviously are not widespread in the UK, and anyway are illegal if they were to be. That they kept saying, oh no, we don't mean we're going to criminalise parents who talk to their kids. We don't mean we're going to criminalise vicars who pray, people will not be tempted into having homosexual. We don't mean any of that. But actually, the bill doesn't say we don't mean any of that. It hasn't got any exemptions. It would be used very broadly. The other bit that was completely disingenuous is that there was an attempt at saying, that almost like the distinction between gender identity and sexual orientation were completely eradicated because they're both lumped together in the bill, as they are indeed in the acronym LGBTQ+, and so I wanted to take that up. But this is also the kind of thing, for this bill, I was very well prepared. In fact, I was terrified because I'd read so much, and I think it's so important to oppose this bill, which I think is a real threat to all sorts of freedoms that we have, that I was slightly over-prepared. I'd spent ages actually whittling it down. We had 5 minutes each, and I kind of wrote a 6-minute speech, but it started off as like an hour and a half type thing. So but because I was number 35, 38 or something on the order paper, by the time, as it was getting closer and closer to me speaking, I thought, everybody else has covered all the same territory. And I therefore had to rewrite the second half of my speech, really to give it a completely different focus. And that sometimes happens, you know, with the best prepared interventions, you realise it's inappropriate. And I also wanted the chance to come back on some of the misleading speeches that we'd heard from other members in the House of Lords. Just for the stats for you, there was about 17 people who argued in defence of the bill, over 30 argued against the bill, so a kind of 2 to 1. It was a really great experience of solidarity, though. Rather unusually, in some ways, there was 2 very good speeches, particularly from the Labour benches, which was from Tony Young and Diane Hayter, Baroness Hayter, Lord Young, who were excellent in the way that they explained their opposition to banning conversion therapy and its threat to children's safeguarding, to therapy. The reason I say it's unusual is because that was like partly Labour backbenchers. Then you have this very weird experience, which is one of the best speeches of the day was from Baroness Ludford from the Lib Dems. She is an absolute Remainiac. I mean, to say that she and I don't get on the question of the EU is the understatement of the year. But one of the best speeches on this, that was quite nice. And then you have a situation where there was a number of, then there was quite a number of Conservatives who were opposing the bill. But you also had quite a number of Conservatives who were supporting the bill because they are of the school of thinking that there should be some legislation in this area, which is one of the reasons why people like Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson got into the mess of promising it at one point and then disavowing their promise. So it's just interesting because political alliances are not quite as you'd think. The only other thing to say on that particular question is that one of the best speeches of the day was by Baroness Hunt, Ruth Hunt, who used to run Stonewall. And although I completely disagreed with what she said, I was actually glad to hear some effort being made by the people who were arguing that conversion therapy should be banned to acknowledge that there's a toxic atmosphere in relation to the debate on trans ideology and that was unhelpful. And Lord Paddock, who gave a very, personal account of the kind of abuse that he'd had and the difficulties had as a gay Christian, and was therefore supporting the bill, but also, again, I thought sensitively handled the difficulties, as did, in fact, a Conservative, Lord Herbert. Now, they were people who were on the opposite side, but actually made good speeches, and I think that it was nice to be in a situation where this issue was taken seriously. And the reason I'm saying that was because the worst speeches that were on display today were those who, I'm afraid, weaponised and mentioned the issue around whether Rishi Sunak had insulted the mother of Brianna Ghey and had, and they kind of used that to say, oh, people on your side are completely toxic. There were speeches from people who were definitely suggesting that we were transphobic if you went along with this. There were people who were saying, oh, well, I believe in free speech, so I think I do defend your right to be hateful to trans people, bigoted about, it's like, thank you very much. Because obviously there was a kind of constant narrative being put forward that, oh, I don't mind you opposing this bill, but we know where you stand. And I think that that's very, insidious and dishonest and in bad faith. And the final thing is to say a little bit about what I didn't points I didn't make in my speech. Lots of people were talking about the dangers to parents being not able to speak frankly to their children if their gender dysphoria means that the teenagers are demanding they get given puberty blockers, and it will be really difficult in that instance. I think that actually the way to see it is that's very important, but something else would happen if this kind of legislation gets passed, which is that young people are being told, the fact that you even need this bill, they're basically being told that there is a kind of adult society out there who are kind of wanting to, perform exorcisms on them if they've got a bit of gender confusion, that are kind of that their parents or any adults who oppose this bill are cruel and nasty and wish them harm. I think it's really dangerous to kind of whip that up. They're also being told that anyone who doesn't affirm their gender identity is involved in conversion therapy and therefore a threat to them realising their potential. Not just realising their potential, but getting what they want. And there was emphasis in the discussion today that young people, how could we deprive young people of being who they are and realising everything that they say that they need to live a happy life? And I'd say this, it's the job of adults that when young people say, if I don't get this, I can't be happy and I can't realise what I want, to say, I know better than you. There are lots of times through, as a parent, loving your child, that you won't indulge in what they say they want. If your daughter is anorexic and says, look, at my body, it's too fat and horrible and I'm going to not eat anymore, you don't go, oh, I agree with you. I mean, you do not affirm, it would be disastrous. And so if a young person says, I hate the body I'm born in, I actually hate it so much, I'm so alienated from it, I want to actually remove my genital parts, I want to take puberty blocks, I want to destroy the body I'm in. As a parent, I think it's completely understandable and right that you say, no, love the body you have, right? In other words, you don't affirm, in fact, you show a preference, because that's the wording in the bill. You show a preference for saying, no, the body you've got now is the one you should stay with, and I'm going to do everything that I can to stop you going down this path. And you do that out of love, don't you? It won't just stop with the family. You just know that if conversion therapy comes in, that it will be part of the armoury of many of those who indulge in cancel culture in university campuses, who will not only now say words harm me, but that speaker shouldn't be allowed in because they are arguing against affirmation of gender identity. Therefore, they're part of conversion therapy and they should actually not just be banned from campus, but be reported to the police. Because it would be a criminal act to go and argue that you should make a preference of your natal body and sex over gender identity. So, actually, these things are really interesting. Complicated, interesting. I'm glad that we weren't sectarian in the House of Lords and had a good debate. I'd urge you all to watch all of it if you've got a chance. We're back in the House of Lords next week. Sadly, the Rwanda safety bill starts, and I think I might be sitting on the back row with my head in my hands, not speaking, because I've made my speech on that. But the victims and prisoners bill will be back, and I suppose I'll be listening out in case I need to jump up and make an incoherent but nonetheless hopefully clarifying point.